Linda van Deursen is a graphic designer who lives and works in Amsterdam. Together with Armand Mavis, she founded the design studio Mavis and van Deursen in 1987. The studio has quietly closed its operations 2 years ago. Linda has been creating new identities for various cultural institutions, such as the Temporary Stedelijk, the Stedelijk Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago. She has also collaborated on major cultural events like Documenta 14, a project I personally love very much, the 10th Venice Architecture Biennale, and many more. Linda has served as the head of graphic design department at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. She's also a senior critic at Yale School of Art in New Haven and teaches at the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague. In my personal travels around the world's exhibitions and the biennial circuit, I have seen many identities being designed by colleagues who have been or directly or indirectly influenced by the work and the teachings of Linda. Many have gone through the above-mentioned Gerrit Rietveld Academy, and as a matter of fact, so many ex-students of this school have gone to design so many of identities in the international art world that they have become known, sometimes jokingly among us designers, as the Rietveld Mafia. By the way, that's a compliment. In her lecture titled Reading Images, Nothing Special, Linda will talk about the construction of images, where we encounter them and how we interact with them, about how we register their meaning, yet how the communicative properties and value of images do not seem to be questioned or discussed that much. So thank you all again for coming, and please welcome to the stage Linda van Deursen.
Just a few more seconds. Oh, I think I have the wrong one.
Yeah, that sound. You have any sound?
No, I don't have any sound. Oh. Is that correct? No. Do I have the right cable? Sorry, I can't even do that. Maybe I should get rid of this. Command L. Is that going down, that light? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you much for the introduction. I think I missed most of it because I was behind the scenes trying to figure this all out. But anyway, I'm still a little bit in shock because of the previous presentation. I was all the time thinking about my presentation and how that would land after that incredibly fantastic, technical, advanced and smart and intelligent approach to image making. I was thinking, I actually feel like, not like a dead person, not even like a nearly dead person, but probably a long dead person. And I also think that this presentation will somehow be more a presentation of going back in time. And maybe, although it's not going that far back in time, I almost feel that it will be feeling like some form of archaeology that I'm going to share with you now. Despite that, I think there might be some value in it, and maybe something that will also maybe will be potential material for an interesting connection between almost these two different approaches of making work. So I'm gonna show this presentation and talk you through it. It's actually a part of some work that I've been doing. As probably in the introduction you heard that I worked for, 35 years as a graphic designer. And one of the things that I really like is to look at images and to work with images. So I have been working with a lot of photographers, with a lot of friends, to try to build narratives and, let's say, interesting documents around their work. And I've always wondered why there is not much debate and not much more critical reflection on how to work with images. As a designer, you can learn how to work with, graphic language, and there's all the details about font making and everything. But weirdly enough, the conversation about images is hardly ever there. And I will try to maybe show some examples of how image making, how we have approached image making, not always successful, but at least in various attempts. So I think most of the process of, working with images is actually quite invisible. But while thinking of the previous presentation by Claire and Rick, I actually think there's a lot of insight in how images were being composed. So maybe it is not entirely invisible, but I do think that maybe it's to a certain extent actually quite internalized. Nevertheless, when I hear the word invisible, I like just to look at, is there any visual proof of it? And of course there is, especially when it comes to photography editing, because when there's someone around with a camera, you see people, debating over images, trying to come to a meaningful selection, trying to compose maybe a certain, story. I like this photo of Ed van der Elsken, a Dutch photographer who made this image in Tokyo in 1986. Spread out all the images on his bed. Can't really see where the image editing process begins or ends, but it's at least, showing a selection of images. This is Joseph Koudelka. And then there's Wolfgang Tillmans, who we probably know, who has like an enormous amount of images, and maybe that's also part of contemporary photography, where people work with different technology, and the image making is incredibly speed up, and there's a lot of image production, which also will ask for a more intense form of image editing. I always like this image here that you see in the back, all these tiny little images of things that he might want to include or exclude in his show. This is an image of Marvin Israel and Diane Arbus from 1971. It's made during a masterclass of her. And the question of image editing, of course, also appears within education and within maybe some form of classes. This is a Polaroid of Walker Evans in a class at Yale. I liked it that he also photographed his own class, and you see that, okay, there's this box with images coming onto the table, and people are trying to make sense of it. This is Jan van Toorn, who was one of my former teachers, a graphic designer, also during a masterclass in Breda. You see the discussion and the acting around images is also something that I like. Photographers judging each other's work, Magnum. And then Casper Koenig editing a book for Yvonne Reiner. So it's not only within photography, but also in, page editing. And then there is some images from photographer Armin Linke, who I know has an image archive of approximately 600,000 images. And the question of image editing is always something that is very important to him. Although he doesn't like to be part of it, I think he's much more a machine in photographing, in photographing and filming, but not as much. He's not as much interested in the editing, and so he at one point asked scientists or thinkers such as Mark Wigley in his studio, and he made a sort of a pre-selection of the work, and then he would, ask them to compile their own story based on his images. This was a project which was called, what was it again? The Appearance of That Which Cannot Be Seen. Here you see Ariella Azulay, Peter Weibel, Jan Salasevich, who was a geologist, and Bruno Latour. And I was also involved with this project, but I thought it was maybe too complicated for tonight. And I thought maybe I should start something which is a little bit complicated too, but it's at least much older. That was not my criteria. But I thought it's kind of an essential project that I think says something about the way we work and the way how we like to think about photography, how we like to approach projects. And it was a project which was dealing with photography, but only because we wanted it to. So KPN stands for Royal Dutch Post and Telecom. And every year they would make an agenda, and an agenda is something which no one knows what it is probably nowadays. But it used to be something, that you could use and put your notes and your appointments and everything, all your meetings in. And they would send it out to a huge network in the Netherlands. And the edition of this calendar was like 100,000 copies. And I remember that it was a prestigious assignment to get this. We were quite young at the time. And for us, this was really a big project. And we felt the responsibility of making 100,000 copies and maybe also reaching out to 100,000 people that maybe normally would not, deal with a certain type of photography that we were interested in. Or maybe, we felt it's kind of an opportunity to do something. So as I said, it's a calendar and it is a little bit large. So it was usually kept on people's desks. And we wanted to make a kind of a publication which would be maybe of a different kind of value than just being about work. And we also liked it that it would maybe confront people with a different kind of photography. Because I had read an article in the newspaper which said that photography of younger photographers it was very hard to publish young photography because there was really no interest in it and it was too expensive. So we thought maybe we can use this calendar as a way to publish. And this calendar starts at 7:30 in the morning and it ends at 7:30 in the evening. So it's like a full day of meticulously writing down your stuff. And we thought we can make a sort of a flip side to this, which means that people in the image world wake up at 7:30 in the morning, but they don't have to go to work, they actually have the day off. So opposing this day of work, we kind of make the flip side on these pages that you could fold back, and it says free, which means, it says vrij, but it means free. So the free day starts at 6:30 in the morning, and what you do is then you sleep in, with your kids. You maybe squeeze some juice. You maybe look at stuff that you left there in the evening before. And maybe this is one of the most important images from this calendar, that it actually shows a telephone and a telephone book, which means that you don't have to advertise the service that the KPN, the Dutch telecommunication actually delivers, because it's already integrated in our lives. So we already make use of all this, and it's somehow invisibly or visibly, it's already integrated and, in our regular lives. You see the empty beds of the day before, you read the newspaper, open up your mail. All this doesn't exist anymore, but it doesn't matter. It was important to us at the time. Some coffee stuff. Just stuff. So this calendar is 52 weeks, and it's like a full day. It's going through a full day of someone having nothing to do, or chooses nothing to do, maybe goes to the hairdresser, does some shopping, maybe watches something in a computer, maybe someone who has a bad day and doesn't want to go to work. You watch some TV with your kids, you do the dishes, you listen to some music, hang out with a friend, and, undress again, go to sleep, fall asleep, and then some people, go to an after party or quarrel till deep early morning, and then it's 7:30 again. So the whole idea was that it's 24 hours in multiple people's lives, and it's kind of a process of editing the work of various artists together to some sort of, everyday life film. And what was nice that we did it with all kinds of people that were representing the different departments in this huge institution. And because of the fact that we worked with them, it was a sort of an ongoing collaborating job to, you know, edit these images. So there were a lot of interesting arguments happening, like we think this image is too dirty, or we don't think we can support two gay people. And, you know, so, and each time there was a lot of good conversations that we had with them. And every time when we came back with our selection, we kind of challenged them again. Don't you think we should have two people, two men, you know, having fun in this book? And then they were like, yeah, you're right, you know. So the fact that we did it together made it also interesting and made it, we're all in it together. So when this thing came out, we also had the idea that after, you know, you could fold the whole thing back and you had a little photo book. And we thought it's also something that you can, you know, later keep and, you know, maybe look back at your own stuff and that of others. And when this actually came out, the company was also on the verge of becoming a private company rather than a state-owned company. So all the managers who had at that time received this and had to give this to their employees or the people that they were working with, they were actually horrified by this product. They were thinking, this is not our company. This is not what we, how we see our company. So the amount of realism that actually we loved and that we thought that was attractive in this kind of photography was something that they could not understand in relation to what they were doing. So the conflict between the reality and how we wanted to show their service embedded in reality, and how they wanted to show their service as something much more glamorous and projecting a whole different future, was a complete mismatch. So I think it also kind of maybe our product, or the thing that we made, probably sped up the idea of we have to seriously look at our communication and not bullshit anymore. So, you know, it was maybe the end of an era. It was also the end of maybe having that kind of freedom as a designer. All of a sudden, there were much more deeper invested marketeers and marketing people who knew how to, you know, address an audience. So it's a kind of a failed project, but I like it because it's about image editing. Continue editing. This is a photo of Ellie Sitsky, who you probably might know of, at least maybe have heard of, who's preparing an album of 15 years in the Red Army in 1934. He was one of the famous, constructors of the Soviet image. And he did it through photography, through making collages that maybe also were not realistic, but they were suggesting a kind of a world that was maybe ideal and was yet to come. And then there's a photograph of Alexei Brodovich, he became famous for designing the pages of Harper's Bazaar, which is an American magazine which is mostly dealing with women's fashion. And these two people were actually born not so far from each other, also not in age, but they went to completely different paths. And I like the idea that image editing, even though if you're coming from the same time, in the same location, and that it kind of, you know, it can take off in so many different routes. So Alexei Brodovich spent most of his life and his career working within glamour, female beauty, and I don't know, it's kind of weird to think how these different men pursued their career. I kind of like this image. It's from the A.B. Warburg Library. It was one of the few images that kind of exists of the work that A.B. Warburg, who was a sort of a German cultural theorist, who was interested in images, and he was trying to prove in his own way how certain gestures survive in image making throughout cultural history. And it was at that time an incredible exercise or endeavor to try to do this through photography, which was new at the time. And it was never really, his ideas were never really recorded because he was always about to do that, but unfortunately he never made it. But he used these panels to travel around and to give lectures and to exercise his ideas. The idea of, let's say, photographing or posing with images, I also like in this image of André Malraux, who made this publication called The Imaginary Museum, which was images from artworks that he couldn't bring together only in a book. But I like how he kind of almost, gently lies on them. And then there's, of course, Harun Farocki, who is a filmmaker and also theorist from Germany, who is one of the few people who really critically studies images. And he's also really concerned with how, as a filmmaker, editing plays an incredibly important role in telling a story. He starts this film with, "Nowadays I can hardly write a word without even having an image on my screen, or even on both screens." So you could say what he's doing now is maybe in 1993, which is again 40 years before, what we just witnessed and saw. It's like an interest in what do images do? What can images tell us? So he says, how do images argue while they are presented linear? And his aim was to have images that think and having films that think. And in order to do that, you also probably have to understand images or have to try to see how they can function. This is an image from George Didi Huberman, a philosopher and also an art historian, who's also obsessed with images. And in every exhibition or every kind of theory that he develops, images play a central role. And he says that all art historians are editors, art re-editors, re-editing and reinventing history. They group and they pile, reinventing to tell a story, to set forth an interpretation. So, I come to the second project, which I call the technical image. And it's around the work of a friend photographer called Dana Lixenberg. And the project is called Tupac Biggie. When she was living in the United States, she had been photographing by herself people living in LA. And I think her free work made quite an impression on American editors of magazines. And she became like a photographer who was really, who people really wanted to work with because she was a woman, she knew how to maybe photograph black people. Anyhow, there was something quite attractive in asking her. So she started frequently working for American magazine, and especially for Vibe magazine in the US. And one of the first assignments she got was to make a portrait of Tupac Shakur. And a few years later of Christopher Wallace, known as Biggie, and also this picture. So it's basically these three pictures that probably most of you have seen before. And without her doing anything special, this picture became actually quite known and quite used, quite, in Dana's words, quite abused. At one point, we were having a drink in a bar, and she kind of started saying like that the whole world was actually using her images for all kinds of purposes. Often there were T-shirts printed with Biggie or Tupac on it, and she was, other than copyrights don't matter anymore, the statement that we heard in Claire's and Rick's lecture, Dana was really obsessed with the fact that her work was being, used by huge multinational companies. And so she felt kind of helpless as a small individual with, like who owns the rights of these photographs? Is it her as a photographer? Is it the magazine who commissioned her? Is it the people, the family of these people? So it was a big issue. And my friend and I, who were having that drink, we said, maybe we should make a publication around it so that we can prove these are your images. It's a bit of an old-fashioned idea, but we thought maybe it's just interesting to try to do this. So we made this journey back in time, and it's called Tupac Biggie. And we started with the negatives of these images, and then we showed the process of the photo shoot, all one-on-one. It also shows Dana's remarks like this, not this photo, not this photo, perhaps this one or that one. So actually the full scope of the photo shoot was reproduced one-on-one. Then it showed the first page of how this photograph was published. It also showed other images of Dana when he died. And then it's kind of as if some machine sets off. It kind of shows the first print. It shows how her image was used for the book to commemorate the life of Tupac Shakur. It showed the reprint of this. And there was also a text by Rob Kenner who commissioned Dana at the time, but also critically analyzed the role of Vibe magazine in between the rivalry of these two famous singers. Anyway, in the middle of this magazine, they somehow come together, and then there's like an insert, which I come back later. I'll come back to that later. It's like a huge poster. And then you kind of starts with Biggie and how this photo shoot actually, goes back into time, and how that becomes the first negative, and then it ends. The poster on one hand is like a huge fold out, has like a long sort of rap poem, which you see some sort of close-ups. And the back of this poster is a huge collage, and this contains all the images that Dana had collected to somehow show the world that the world of image making after her image became somehow famous. So this project is maybe not so much proving the rights of her, but it's more proving how maybe one image becomes such an important image that people like to use and reuse and reuse again. And I didn't know how to approach this first until I started reading a book by Willem Flusser called Towards a Philosophy on Photography. And all the things that he says there somehow made sense in how to maybe structure all these images. Apparatuses improve by means of social feedback, or the signifier of images is magical. Apparatuses are part of a culture and consequently this culture is recognizable in them. And consecutively this culture is recognizable in them. Sorry for my clumsy English. But because of this, because of his analysis, it kind of made me, it gave me some ideas of how to use the images, not in such a linear way, but much more as a kind of a visual thing that was trying to create angles and, give a much more maybe dynamic overview. Some more images. I think Dana always liked this poster much more than I did. It's kind of funny, because every time when she has an exhibition with the work, she always wants to have this poster, and it's always kind of a part that somehow maybe shows the history of this image and maybe the future of it, I don't know. We also made t-shirts, because this book was published by a brand in Amsterdam, Bata, a street brand, and they kind of really liked the poster as well to produce t-shirts. So it's maybe also a sort of form of revenge, or to maybe even control these images yourself and make something of it rather than be passive. Then we go to the third project. Before that, I was also looking at images within the fashion world. And we start again with Alexei Brodovich editing images on a table. And then there's this woman, Carmel Snow, who was for a long time the editor of Harper's Bazaar. She started, I think, in 1933 till 1958. So she was a really important woman and almost like a monument in the fashion world. And this is a staged a staged moment in the offices of Harper's Bazaar where you all see them attentively, looking at images and, overlooking other types of things. But it's of course, it's a set, it's not really real. Who knows what they were doing for real? But I like the idea of them, being invested in this activity. This was kind of for real, because in her biography, she was always very keen on going to Paris and being the first one, as if it was kind of reporting back from the war. It was one of the most important things to try to be really fast and, examine what was being shown on the catwalks, bringing that back as soon as possible, turning it into a photo shoot with the woman on her right, which is Louise Del Wolf. So they were in the middle of the night in bed, looking at the contact sheets that she had prepared. And so it's just, like I said, it's almost like a matter of life and death, but of course it isn't. Then you see her here with Diane Vreeland, who would become a really important fashion editor, but then for Vogue just a little bit later. And she was also, she had her own way of editing images. And you can see that, for instance, here on a wall in her office at Vogue. Oh, no, this was still at Bazaar, but this is at Vogue. Smoking and looking at images. This is I don't think this is, this thing here is a sort of a poster wall, but it's more like I like the idea of that there's also these different types of formats being invented to look at images, or maybe in this case, illustrations or posters, also at the offices of Vogue. And then in the September issue, which was a film about Vogue editing by Anna Wintour and her team, you see also this special wall where they created these small clips where you could, put the pages in and then easily shuffle them around. Another editor of images, you could say, is Karl Lagerfeld. I think Karl Lagerfeld is maybe one of the few historians in the fashion world. He bought 4,000 books a month, and often 2 copies of one book, one to cut up and one to maybe keep in his library. But you can also see that this world, this material world, is something that has informed his whole, thinking and reference work. There's also a clip from a film by John Galliano that was recently shown on YouTube, where he showed his references. And it's a set of books on the wall that you can flip through and look at his references. Anyway. References is not something new. And it's also, I just think that everyone probably likes the idea of knowing what you're doing by referencing and trying to maybe, find a way how to deal with images and maybe a certain interest in them. This is a photo of a friend, Paul Elliman. We are of the same generation, and I think this material world in fashion images kind of, it's something that we could not really avoid. It was always there. And at one point, when it's always there, you also want to use it. You want to be part of it, or you want to have something to do with it. You own it. This is part of a performance of another person called Joke Robaert, same generation more or less, who also has always kept, was tearing out pages from fashion magazines and kept them as a sort of a library that is always being activated by different types of works that she instigates. This is then when she invited younger people to try to make narratives with these images. And this is from a performance, and actually maybe more an exhibition by Julie Peters in Rome, where she created a daybed that could function in different ways. But also the visitors here are performing maybe the catwalk, or also maybe viewing the activity or looking at the activity of, editing images on the floor. This is all to lead you to the third project, which is called, it is a publication for Nigel Shafran called The Well, that I made with him in 2022. Nigel Shafran is a British photographer who was not really known for his fashion work at the time. And he was making his own kind of intimate photographs of his family, very close by. And I was helping him out with a book in 2013. And we were sitting there trying to figure out, the edit of that book. And then he showed me this image, which was part of a series that he had just made for British Vogue. And I was saying to him, like, what kind of image is that? I immediately had to think about Louis Buñuel, or, all kinds of, it kind of set off all kinds of images that I thought were really interesting. And they didn't really seem to me like the typical fashion image. So I was really thinking, I would like to make a book about your fashion images. So I said that, can we make a book about your fashion images? And he was over my dead body. That's very funny. But he was really serious about it. And he said, I don't want to be known for my fashion work. And so I think, showing my generation, looking at these fashion images and trying to come to terms with them, I think we also felt a certain, we were intrigued by them, but we didn't know how to deal with them. And I think we were a little embarrassed. And certainly when you would actually earn your money with making fashion images, that was really something which was a bit bad, or wrong. So after saying this in 2013, it took me almost 10 years to convince him to make this publication. And I think it's also because Nigel started working more for fashion, and I think he became more aware of his position. He became also more aware of maybe how he, as a photographer, was maybe contributing to certain kind of images that were actually interesting, and trying to also maybe reveal a different type of fashion photography. So again, Nigel, who lives in London, came to Amsterdam, and he wanted me to help him with editing this book. It was like 3 to 5 years ago. And he thought we could do that in a day. And I was very optimistic. And I said to him, let's try. Okay, we've tried to do this. And of course, we did everything except editing images. We chatted, we hung out, we looked at some photos, and we were trying to arrive at some ideas. And in the end, he had to rush off to the airport, but the good thing was that he had to leave his hard drive at the studio. And this hard drive was with me, and I kind of had the opportunity to look at his images, and I started, following his images, looking at all the things that he had been photographing, as a young kid, with his first images on the street, with his first camera on the street. And the subject of people shopping was always there. So I kind of started making selections of him photographing shopping windows, people looking at clothes, people looking into shops, hanging out, but also how this act of shopping has changed over the course of, 30 years. This was a photo shoot that it's not a photo shoot, it's just some images that he made in Belfast in 1992. And it was after the bombing that the glass of these shops had been damaged, and they were just putting in new images of, they're putting in new glass, some form of new images. But I liked to kind of try to build a sort of a portrait of him as a photographer who was innocently walking around with a fake Gucci stuff and draping it onto all the people in the street. And that was his idea of fashion, And at the same time, photographing these things. How he started out working as a fashion photographer was very different as what he does now. But it was really about playing around with people who were interested maybe in form of styling. And it took them days to make one photograph, and they would, it was a slow process, but very, very much, very playful, very imaginative, and very loose. So I think the power of this kind of images has always been attractive, and not so much because of Nigel's qualities, but maybe because of the certain realism, but maybe most of all because it's youth, and it's the sort of beauty of youth, the casualness of how youth can wear anything. Again, this is an insert with Nigel hanging out in shopping center. This is one of his famous areas that he photographed a lot with Melanie Ward. They became kind of famous for this series of teenagers hanging out in the shopping center. And it's not so much fashion, it's just people that they find on the street, and maybe there's a minimal amount of styling, or maybe not even. He also started photographing portraits much more. And there's a lot of photographs in this book that were never really published because he didn't like them at the time, or the editors didn't like them. But I always felt there's so much quality in these images. How this is at the birthday of Linda Evangelista. He was invited to photograph her at her home, and she's here with her school friends hanging out. And I don't know, there's a lot of historical beauty and accidental beauty, and also maybe accidental storytelling and history in these images. He also went with Kathy Ecker to New York to photograph the Spice Girls, while Kathy Ecker would be the person who would interview the Spice Girls. And he did that for the Guardian the weekend edition. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, we have to have this interview republished, because I thought it was just incredibly great to have this interview there again. This is also, I think, quite beautiful. Like one of the famous models, Stephanie Seymour, in her hometown in Connecticut. But you can imagine this woman who's incredibly rich, looking at some more watches with a fur coat that you can't imagine. But so the world of fashion is being photographed in the eyes of Nigel, and it's kind of also a little bit around the world of fashion. It's young, aspiring models who, go to model offices. This is part of the series that I liked very much, which is Nigel going to Avenue Montaigne, where all the famous shops are, and he stages the act of shopping in various ways in all these different shops. And all these models are actually wearing the clothes that are being sold in these shops. But they make a photo of a bag, or they, acquire a Gucci thing, or they sign off the bill. And this was never published, but I found this in his photographs when I was looking at his hard drive, and I was like, oh, the act of paying, it's important, has to be in this book. And of course, this is a typical photo, which is funny. And then this one that you've already seen. But I think the kind of self-consciousness about shopping and this relationship that we know is revealed and is interesting to publish. This is another photo shoot. It's not a photo shoot, but it's him looking at, shopping places and what they look like. And I think it's also purposeful to document them in time, like this mirrored image, Miss Selfridge's. This is a typical Nigel Shafran way of approaching fashion photography. He liked this photograph of these workers on the steps, and then he asked his models to do exactly the same thing, So it's like, it's not inventing anything, it's just giving the models something to do, or trying to give them a kind of a purpose or a role within the kind of images that he creates. I also really like this image of, I think it's Bella Hadid, who holds this sign, "Get me out of this page," in a kind of a joyful way. Is it criticism or is it humor? This is also typical Nigel. This is not planned. I mean, in order to maybe shoot in this place, it would cost a fortune to have, to bring a huge team of people and to kind of secure this place. But he just does it instantly. Within 5 minutes, they have to make this photo, and then they just, run off. More seriously, but still, I think, rather funny to have, probably quite an expensive outfit, but to kind of compare it with the cheapest crisps that you can find in the supermarket. And then also this one I always liked, where you have this young model trying to cover up all the text on this basically all the advertising on this billboard. And this is maybe one of the funniest images in the book. It's Bella Hadid dressed up as a petrol pump. And it's kind of a photo shoot in Vogue for her. She's holding a bag, which is probably more than $3,000 or euros, I don't know. But the bag looks a bit like a bucket that you have at the petrol pump. And this petrol pump was actually a costume that Nigel had made for himself when he was going to some sort of a party of a friend who became 50, or who celebrated his 50th anniversary. But he recreated this petrol pump and integrated it in the fashion shoot. So it is kind of a book that I think shows his angle on fashion photography, and also it's a form of maybe. I mean, I think it's hopeful in the sense that there's many ways to photograph women in clothes. This is something that he ended the book with, and it's just young women trying to reproduce the gestures of images, of commercial images in the city. But I also like this as something, that we try to find to end the book with. Then there's also a huge, not huge, small. It's like all the credits, and you can also see that the first photo shoots, there's like 2 people involved, and then the other ones are overproduced, and there's not even in terms of Vogue. There's very small productions, but they're kind of interesting in how the production of these images change over time. And then there was the question of the cover. We had many ideas, and then in the end, the idea was that we wanted to have a cover that was maybe already published as a cover. And this was one of the first images of Nigel that was used for a French magazine on a cover in February '89. And the only thing that I did was that I sprayed away the typography, because this is the original cover, but I thought it was kind of nice to show the cover without the context, so that you actually look again at the images, because that was a bit the idea of the book as well. And then I have one last thing, which is something, maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is Stuart and David Reinford from Dexter Sinister, who will occupy a space upstairs here on the 2nd or the 1st floor actually, which is called Grey Area, would like to show a work, sort of a video work or a slideshow that will last for a month, that will be on view for a month. And they asked me to make a slideshow of something that I have started a while ago. It's just some images of women wearing the news. And I was looking at, trying to kind of compile a story around women as kiosks, how women end up in fashion shoots or in funny situations, or how acts of liberation. Anyway, it's a long story, but I will show you some images that give you a bit of an idea of what this will be. It's something it's kind of never ready, but I like to keep developing it. I sometimes save images because I like what they look like. There's this Katy Perry who arrives at LA airport, and she's covering up, she's covered up in a Chanel towel, because she probably didn't have time to, or didn't feel like revealing herself at this hour, or after a long flight. But it feels a bit like she stepped out of a billboard and kind of Chanel advertising almost fell over her. She's taking it with her. And then, of course, this Balenciaga ad, where the news has become some sort of an item that people are referring to as print, but nothing more. And then all the idea of this being published within media, but not the news. There's a lot of things that I like about this image. But I thought there's this sort of stage where women were trying also to make a living and trying to, find a way how to maybe present multiple newspapers and media sources at the same time. So it feels a bit, this woman in Berlin is wearing like a screen that can be changed all the time. And then there's this other image of a suffrage worker who collected all the newspaper clippings so that women's voting was actually, that made it, you know, in 1919 in Missouri in the US. But I also like the installation, that it's almost, she's part of it. And I like the idea of her wearing it. And then there's also, again, how Elisitsky and Mikhail Plashkin portrayed the Soviet woman within this huge exhibition that was dedicated to newsprint in Cologne in '28. And the woman as a kind of an active, activated and active persona, maybe full of information, abstracted figure. And then again, there's this, the people, the women's workers on the street who were dressing up and who were also selling local newspapers, but also, you know, portrayed themselves in photo studios. I quite like the kind of combination between these images. And it's not only these images that I think are really great images, but it's also how these images are, again, being recycled in fashion and remade. And then it's also like, why, to what end, and what is the purpose of this sort of new adaptation of this, till the point of this image where the kind of radical artist collective Claire Fontaine made this news floor, which is a very, let's say, a significant work of theirs, which they made for the fashion house Christian Dior, and kind of presented it, the whole thing, as a feminist stage. But I was always thinking, why the hell did they take on that job, you know? So there's a lot of questions that I don't know exactly how to answer, but I'd like to think about them, and I'd like to push my thinking in this narrative that I will propose and will be on view in December this year. So, to be continued. That was the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would also recommend that you all subscribe to the Cukrarna mailing list, because we will be sending out emails and invites for all the Grey Area events. Also, Grey Area and all the videos are being streamed live, so you can come here for the events and the videos. But if you go to grey-area.cukrarna.art, you can actually stream all the videos for as long they are being presented in the space itself.
Yeah, go and have a look and let me know what you think. Or maybe submit some images that you think could feature there. It's always good.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes before the next conversation. So if you have any questions, please raise your arm and I'll bring you the microphone.
Great.
Shy?
Oh, there is someone.
One in the back.
Hey! Uh-oh, I'm scared already.
I missed the very beginning, so I'm sorry if you already spoke about it, but I'm curious about your own image archives, and are they digital or physical or both, and how you organize them and how you deal with your own image archives?
It's a mess. I mean, it's an incredible mess, but they're digital, mostly. I mean, I started, of course, with, you know, selecting images from magazines and from newspapers, but I never took it really serious, so it's a mess. And by now, they're partly also half eaten by silverfish or paperfish. I don't even want to go there. But the good thing is that most images can be found back, you know. So it's not that complicated to find images back in a digital form. And like you, I also don't care so much about the image rights or the quality of them. I'm interested in what they represent and how I can use them for my own interest. So it's a really messy process, and it's also I mean, it's not something that I do consistently. It's not that I look constantly at images. There's sometimes, you know, I come across an image and I like to save it, And every once in a while, this is maybe activated by a question, like maybe you want to do something around this, or maybe there's a contribution that someone asks me, or to write a small thing. And then images always start off something that I find helpful. And maybe the image becomes the most important thing in the end. So usually when I get when I have to write a little assignment or a little project, I start looking more intensively, and then the collection becomes more articulated and broadens. But it's really nice to to revisit these projects over time, or these subjects over time, because they become more, richer and better. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking a question. That's it? Oh.
I have a question. When you, for example, work with a photographer, is your selection or interpretation sometimes very different from what the photographer wanted to show, or the images he chose, or is there ever any conflict of what you think or what they think is the best way to show their work?
You're talking about Nigel now?
For example, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, because Nigel is someone who really likes to control the idea of his work. And it started with that he didn't want to publish anything, He didn't want to publish the fashion work to begin with. So to convince him to do that was a big job. And I actually did so by also looking at all the heroes of him, like Irving Penn, Walker Evans, anyone that you can think of also worked for fashion. So that was not a big deal in the end, because he's not stupid. He knows also a lot about photography and photography history. But I think every photographer has an image of them as a photographer, and of a good image, and of maybe an important image. But I think I'm not so far away from what he thinks, what is a good image. I like most of his images, and I think for 95% we're completely on one line. And the fact that he left this hard drive with all these other kinds of images that he didn't really consider, that was maybe something that was unexpected, but it made him more comfortable about the project. Do you know what I mean? They just published a story about him in Fantastic Man, and in that story in that interview he says that I actually came up with a version of himself that he didn't know, and he kind of describes it as that I know him better than he knows himself, which is of course not the case. But yeah, maybe sometimes it's kind of good to have a bit of an outside view, and I like to convince people. I don't know. I'd like to try to make the best at it, and maybe sometimes it's just convincing by doing so. It's not always easy, but it's interesting to talk about it. That's the best part, actually.